We have to try, even if the odds are against us. It's the only way.
Hope won't win this war, human. Only strength and strategy will suffice.
We stand here in the mud, yes, but we stand together. They think the rain wash us away.
We can't stay here. It's not safe anymore. Where will we go?
They are everywhere.
The man had learned to hate long before he understood what hatred truly was. It hadn't come to him as a choice, not at first. It had been taught, shaped, reinforced by every story whispered in the village and every scar left behind by things no one dared to speak of openly. Orcs were not just enemies. They were a certainty, a truth that needed no questioning. Creatures of destruction, of chaos, of cruelty. That was what he had been told. That was what he had believed. And over time, belief had hardened into something stronger, something that lived inside him without needing to be reminded. His home stood at the edge of the village, where the land began to give way to the untamed forest beyond. It was not a place chosen by accident. He had built it there deliberately, keeping just enough distance from others to avoid their noise, their lives, their constant need for connection. Isolation suited him. It kept things simple, predictable, safe. Safe from what? He never said out loud. But everyone knew. The villagers respected him in their own way. Not because he was kind or welcoming, but because he was dependable. He did his part. He kept to himself. And most importantly, he never questioned the things they all agreed on, especially when it came to orcs. He didn't argue when others spoke of raids or violence. He didn't challenge the fear that shaped their lives. He accepted it, carried it, made it part of who he was. Because to question it would have meant questioning something deeper, something personal. The fire burned low in his home that evening, casting steady shadows across the wooden walls. He sat near it, his posture relaxed but his expression distant, his thoughts drifting somewhere beyond the quiet routine of his day. Nights like this were familiar, unchanging. The same silence, the same rhythm, the same sense of control over a life that rarely surprised him. He preferred it that way. Surprises led to mistakes, and mistakes had consequences. His gaze shifted briefly toward the window, where the dark outline of the forest stood still against the fading light. He didn't look at it often, not directly. Not because it frightened him, but because it represented something he had no control over. Something unpredictable. Something that didn't follow rules. His jaw tightened slightly. He didn't need to see it to know what lived there. Orcs. The word alone carried weight. Not just from stories, but from memory. There had been a time, years ago now, when the hatred had not felt so absolute. When it had been something distant, something shaped more by others than by himself. But that had changed. It always does. He didn't think about that night often. Didn't let himself. Because when he did, the details came too clearly. The sounds, the fire, the loss. He stood abruptly, the movement breaking the stillness as if cutting through something he didn't want to face. He moved toward the shelf near the wall, reaching for a small tool, something to occupy his hands, to ground his thoughts in something simple. Work helped. Routine helped. Anything that kept him from thinking too far back. Because the past didn't change. It didn't soften. It stayed exactly as it was. And for him, that was enough. A faint sound came from outside. He paused. Not moving. Not reacting immediately. Just listening. It was nothing. Probably the wind. Or an animal passing through the brush. The kind of sound that meant nothing. The kind of sound he ignored every day. Still, something about it lingered. Just long enough to make him aware of it. Then it faded. The silence returned. Unbroken. He exhaled slowly, setting the tool back down, his focus returning to the fire, to the present, to the life he had built around certainty. Hatred had given him that. Clarity. Direction. A line that never blurred. Orcs were the enemy. There was no reason to question it. No reason to doubt it. No reason to ever let anything challenge it. Because the moment that line broke, everything else would too. And the man had no intention of letting that happen. Not now. Not ever. But sometimes. The strongest beliefs are not tested when we are ready. They are tested when we least expect it. And when that moment comes, it doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait. It simply arrives and changes everything. The sound came again. This time, clear. Not the wind. Not an animal. Something heavier. something struggling. The man's head turned slowly toward the door, his body going still in a way that wasn't calm. It was alert. Every instinct he had built over years of caution told him the same thing. Ignore it. Whatever was outside did not belong to him. It was not his problem. It was safer that way. But the sound didn't stop. A low, uneven movement, like something dragging itself across the ground. Closer. His jaw tightened. No, he muttered under his breath, as if saying it might make the moment pass. But it didn't. The sound reached the edge of his door. Then, a faint thud. Not a knock. Not deliberate. More like something had collapsed. The silence that followed was worse. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the door as if it might open on its own, as if whatever lay beyond it might disappear if he waited long enough. It didn't. Slowly, he stepped forward. Each movement felt heavier than it should have, like his body understood what his mind refused to accept. His hand hovered near the latch, hesitation settling in, not from fear, but from certainty. He already knew what he would find, and he didn't want to confirm it, because once he did, there would be no turning back. The silence stretched. Then, he opened the door. The night air rushed in, cold and still, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and something sharper beneath it, blood. His eyes adjusted quickly, and there, on the ground just beyond the threshold, was a figure, an orc. She lay partially on her side, her body twisted at an unnatural angle, her breathing shallow and uneven. Dark stains marked her clothing, spreading from multiple wounds that had long since stopped being fresh. Her skin, usually strong and unyielding by every story he had ever heard, looked dull, drained, almost fragile in the dim light. The man froze. Everything inside him locked into place. This was what he had always known. This was the enemy, the monster, the thing he had been taught to hate without question. And it was right there, at his door, weak, vulnerable, dying. His grip on the door tightened. This was the moment, the one his entire life had prepared him for. Leave her, close the door, walk away. That was what he should do. That was what anyone would do. The orc's hand shifted slightly, her fingers curling weakly against the dirt as if trying to find something to hold on to. A faint sound escaped her, barely a breath, barely a voice, but enough to carry through the silence. Help. The word was broken, fragile, and completely wrong. Orcs didn't ask for help. They didn't sound like that. They didn't. His thoughts stopped, because what he was seeing, what he was hearing, didn't match the certainty he had lived with for years. This wasn't a threat. This wasn't an attack. This was someone dying on his doorstep. His chest tightened. The line he had never questioned, the one that had always been clear, absolute, unshakable, blurred for the first time. Just slightly, but enough. He took a step back, not away, but to the side. The movement surprised even him. He stared at it for a second, as if trying to understand why his body had chosen that direction instead of the other. Then he looked back at her, at the way she struggled just to breathe, at the way her strength was already slipping away, at the way she had still managed to reach his door before collapsing. And something inside him, something he had buried beneath years of belief, shifted. This wasn't about orcs. Not in this moment. This was about a life. A choice. He exhaled sharply, the decision forming not from thought, but from something deeper. Damn it, he muttered. Then he moved. He stepped forward, crouching beside her, his hands hesitating only for a fraction of a second before reaching out. The moment he touched her, he felt it. The heat of fever, the weakness beneath what should have been strength. She wasn't going to survive this. Not without help. And maybe not even then. He hesitated again, just briefly, because this was the point of no return. Once he did this, everything would change. His place in the village, his beliefs, his certainty, all of it, gone. He looked at her one last time, at the reality of what lay in front of him. Then, he made his choice. He lifted her. The weight of her body was heavier than he expected, but not impossible. She barely reacted, her strength too far gone to resist, her breathing shallow against the movement. He carried her inside, set her down near the fire, closed the door behind them. The sound of the latch falling into place echoed louder than it should have, because it wasn't just a door closing. It was something else, something final. The man stood there for a moment, looking at her, at what he had done, at what it meant. His chest rose and fell slowly, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel certain. Because the man who had always known exactly where he stood had just crossed a line he could never uncross. And deep down, he knew this wasn't just a moment of weakness. This was the night his belief broke. And once broken, it would never be the same again. The fire burned a little brighter now, fed with more wood than usual, its warmth spreading through the small room in steady waves. The man worked in silence, his movements controlled, deliberate, almost mechanical, as if focusing on the task would keep his thoughts from catching up with him. The orc woman lay where he had placed her, her breathing still uneven, her body tense even in unconsciousness, as though some part of her refused to believe she was safe. Safe. The word didn't sit right. Not here. Not like this. He crouched beside her again, unwrapping the torn fabric that clung to her wounds. The damage was worse than he had first seen. Deep cuts, bruising, signs of a fight that had not ended quickly. Whoever had done this hadn't intended for her to survive. His jaw tightened. That thought should have brought satisfaction. It should have felt like justice. Instead, it didn't. He pushed the feeling aside, focusing instead on cleaning the wounds as best he could. The cloth in his hand darkened quickly, the water turning red as he worked. She didn't wake, but her body reacted. Small flinches, subtle tension, signs that she was still there, still holding on. "You should have died out there," he muttered quietly. The words came automatically, out of habit, out of belief. But even as he said them, they felt wrong. He finished wrapping her side, tying the cloth firmly before leaning back slightly, studying her again. She didn't look like the stories. She didn't look like the thing he had built in his mind for years. There was strength in her. Yes, he could see it in the structure of her body, in the way even now she seemed ready to react. But there was something else too. Restraint. Control. Nothing about her suggested the kind of mindless violence he had always associated with her kind. He frowned slightly. "That doesn't change anything," he said under his breath. But it did. He just didn't want to admit it yet. Time passed slowly. The fire crackled. The room remained quiet. And eventually, she moved. It was subtle at first, a shift of her hand, a tightening of her fingers. Then her breathing changed, growing slightly deeper, more aware. Her eyes opened. Not slowly, not groggily, sharply, alert, focused. The man tensed instinctively, his body reacting before his mind could catch up. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Her gaze moved quickly, taking in the room, the fire, the distance between them, the position of the door. Then it settled on him. "You brought me inside," she said. Her voice was rough, but steady. He didn't answer immediately. "Yes," he said finally. A faint pause followed. "Why?" The question came without emotion. Not gratitude, not suspicion, just fact. He frowned slightly. "You were dying. That's not an answer. It's enough of one." She studied him for a moment longer, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she pushed herself up. The movement was controlled, but it cost her. He could see it in the way her body tightened, the way her breath caught slightly as she shifted. "You shouldn't move," he said. "I shouldn't be here," she replied. The words were calm, but firm. Another silence settled between them, different this time, sharper, more aware. She looked down briefly at the bandages, then back at him. "You treated me," she said. "Yes." Another pause. Then, "Why?" The question came again. This time, he didn't answer right away. Because the truth wasn't simple. It wasn't clear. It wasn't something he had decided with logic or reason. "I don't know," he said. The honesty surprised even him. She didn't react the way he expected. Didn't challenge it. Didn't question it. She simply nodded once. "That's worse," she said. He frowned. "How is that worse?" "Because it means you didn't think about it." The words landed heavier than they should have. Because they were right. He hadn't thought about it. He had just done it. And now, he was living with it. The woman shifted slightly again, her gaze moving toward the door. "They'll come," she said. The man's expression tightened. "Who?" She looked back at him. "The ones who did this." A faint silence followed. "You're sure?" he asked. "Yes." The certainty in her voice left no room for doubt. The man exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. "So now I'm involved. You already were the moment you touched me." The truth of that settled quickly. Unavoidable. He looked at her again. At the way she sat there. Not afraid, not desperate, but aware. Ready. Even injured. Even weak. "You don't act like a monster," he said before he could stop himself. The words hung in the air. She didn't react immediately. Then, "That's because I'm not one," she said. Simple. Direct. The man held her gaze. For a long moment. He didn't argue. Because for the first time, he wasn't sure he could. Morning did not arrive gently. It came with noise. Voices, loud, sharp, layered with something the man recognized immediately. Not curiosity. Not concern. Anger. He was already awake when the first shout reached the house, his body stiffening as the sound cut through the quiet like a blade. For a moment, he didn't move. He didn't need to. He knew what it meant. They had found out. Behind him, the orc woman shifted slightly, her eyes opening just as sharply as they had the night before. She didn't ask what was happening. She didn't need to. "They're here," she said. "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. Outside, the voices grew louder, more distinct now. "You think we wouldn't notice?" "He brought it here." "Open the door." The man exhaled slowly, pushing himself to his feet. The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls tighter, as if the outside world had closed in all at once. "You should leave," he said. The woman didn't move. "No." His jaw tightened. "This isn't your fight." "It became mine when I stepped inside," she replied. The same truth, spoken differently. He didn't argue, because there was no time. Another heavy knock slammed against the door, harder this time, demanding. "Open it," a voice shouted. The man stepped forward, stopping just short of the door. His hand hovered near the latch, but he didn't reach for it yet. He could feel the weight of what waited on the other side. People he had known for years. People who had trusted him. People who now stood there with anger instead of familiarity. He glanced back once. The woman was already watching the door, her posture steady despite her injuries, her focus sharp. "They won't listen," she said. "I know. They'll try to take me. I know. And if you stop them, they won't see it as stopping them," he finished. "They'll see it as betrayal." The word hung heavy. Because it was true. He took a slow breath. Then, he opened the door. The reaction was immediate. The villagers stood just beyond the threshold, their faces tight with tension, their eyes moving past him the moment the door swung open. Searching. Finding. The moment they saw her. Everything shifted. "There," someone shouted. "I knew it. You've lost your mind." The man stepped forward slightly, blocking the doorway just enough to slow them. "She's injured," he said. That was the first thing he chose to say. Not defense. Not justification. Just truth. It didn't matter. "She's an orc," another voice snapped. "That's all that matters." Murmurs rose behind them. Agreement, anger, fear feeding into each other until the air felt thick with it. "You brought this into our village," a man at the front said, his voice colder than the rest. "You put all of us at risk." The man met his gaze. "She didn't come here to hurt anyone." "That's what they always do," someone shouted from behind. "She's dying," the man said again. "And you should have let her." The words hit harder than anything else. Not because they were loud, but because they were certain. The man felt it clearly, the line forming between him and them. A line that had never existed before. A line he had never thought he would stand on the wrong side of. But now, he was. "She stays," he said. The words came out before he could reconsider them, before he could soften them, before he could make them easier to accept. They landed, and everything went quiet. For just a second. Then, "You don't get to decide that," the man at the front said. "I already did." The silence that followed was different. Not shocked, not uncertain, resolved. The villagers shifted, their stances hardening, their eyes no longer questioning, deciding. "You're choosing it over us?" someone asked. The question cut deeper than the accusation. The man didn't answer immediately, because the truth wasn't simple, but it was clear. "I'm choosing not to let someone die," he said. "That's not what this is," another voice snapped. "That's exactly what it is." The tension snapped. "Move," the man at the front said. The word wasn't a request. The man didn't move. Behind him, he could feel the woman shift slightly, her presence steady, ready if needed, but still holding back. Because this wasn't her fight yet. It was his. "You need to step aside," the man said again. "No." The answer came without hesitation. The villagers reacted instantly, murmurs rising, anger sharpening, the space between them tightening as a few stepped forward. "This is your last chance," the man at the front warned. The man held his ground. His heart was steady now. Not calm, not fearless, but certain, because the moment had come. The one where belief meets action. where everything he had been taught, everything he had lived by, was tested, and he had already made his choice. No, he said again. The word settled. Final. And in that moment, he saw it clearly. The shift in their eyes. The way they looked at him now. Not as one of them, but as something else. Something they didn't trust. Something they didn't understand. Something they might have to turn against. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. Because the man who had once stood with them now stood against them. All because he had chosen to save what they called a monster. And in doing so, he had just lost everything he used to belong to. The shift didn't happen all at once. It didn't need to. It showed in small things first. The way the villagers stopped speaking over each other. The way their anger sharpened into something more focused, more controlled. They weren't shouting anymore. They were deciding. The man stood in the doorway, his body still, his stance firm. But he could feel it clearly now. The weight of their attention, the distance growing between him and the people he had known his entire life. "You're making a mistake," the man at the front said. The words were calm. Too calm. "I've heard that," he replied. "You don't understand what you're doing." "No," he said. "I understand exactly what I'm doing." A faint pause followed. Then you understand what this means." The man didn't answer. Because he did. He understood. More than he wanted to. The villagers began to shift again, not stepping forward this time, but spreading slightly, creating space, forming something unspoken but clear. Not a crowd anymore. A group. A side. "You're not one of us if you stand with it," someone said. The word hit differently now. It. Not her. Not a person. Not anything that could be understood. Just something to be removed. The man's jaw tightened slightly. "She has a name," he said. That drew a reaction. Not confusion. Not curiosity. But rejection. "We don't care what it calls itself," another voice snapped. The line sharpened further. "You're defending it," the man at the front said. "Yes." The answer came clean. No hesitation. No attempt to soften it. That was the moment it became final. The man saw it in their faces. The last bit of doubt disappearing. Replaced by something colder. Something harder. "You've chosen your side," the man at the front said. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They carried weight on their own. The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked at them, really looked this time. At the people he had grown up with, worked beside, lived among. The familiarity was still there, but it felt distant now, like something that belonged to a different version of his life. Then he nodded. Yes. The single word settled into the space between them and broke whatever had still been holding it together. The reaction wasn't explosive. It wasn't chaotic. It was worse. It was quiet. A few of them stepped back, not in fear, in separation, as if distance alone could redefine what he was. "You don't come back from this," someone said. The man didn't argue, because he knew. "You'll leave," the man at the front continued. Not a question, a decision. The man's eyes narrowed slightly. "This is my home." "Not anymore." The words landed with finality. A silence followed. Not uncertain, not waiting. Closed. Behind him, the woman hadn't moved, but he could feel her attention sharpen again, her awareness catching the shift just as clearly as he had. "They're done talking," she said quietly. "I know." The man looked at them again. "So that's it?" he asked. "After everything, this is where it ends?" The man at the front didn't hesitate. "You ended it when you brought it inside." The answer was immediate. Absolute. The man exhaled slowly, something tightening in his chest. Not from regret, but from the weight of what was being lost. Years. Familiarity. Belonging. All of it. Gone. Just like that. "You're asking me to walk away from everything," he said. "No," the man replied. "You already did." The truth of it didn't leave room for argument. Another pause. Then, "You have until nightfall," the man at the front said. "To leave." The words were measured, controlled, but there was no mistaking what they meant. "And if I don't?" the man asked. The silence that followed answered for him. He didn't need them to say it. He could see it, feel it. They wouldn't hesitate. Not anymore. The man nodded once. Slowly, taking it in, accepting it. "Understood," he said. The villagers didn't respond. They didn't need to. One by one, they began to turn away, their attention already shifting, their decision already made. No one looked back. No one lingered. They had drawn the line, and he was no longer on their side of it. The man stood there until the last of them disappeared from view, the quiet returning slowly, but not in the same way as before. This quiet felt empty, stripped, different. He closed the door. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Behind him, the woman spoke. You can still go back, she said. He didn't turn. No. The answer came without hesitation. They gave you a choice. They gave me a condition. A faint pause. Then, you'd leave everything behind? She asked. He looked around the room. The walls, the fire, the life he had built piece by piece over years. Then he looked back at her. I already have. The words settled. Quiet. But final. Because the truth was simple now. There was no going back. No undoing what had been done. No reclaiming what had been lost. The man who had lived here, the man who had belonged, was gone. And in his place was someone else. Someone who had made a choice and would live with it, no matter the cost. The house felt different now, not because anything inside had changed, but because everything outside had. The silence no longer belonged to him. It pressed in from beyond the walls, carrying the weight of what had just happened, of what had been said, of what could no longer be undone. The man stood near the center of the room, unmoving, his thoughts no longer scattered but settling into something quieter. Final. Behind him, the woman watched. Not with urgency, not with expectation, but with a kind of stillness that suggested she understood exactly what had been lost. You didn't hesitate, she said. He didn't turn. I did, he replied. Her brow narrowed slightly. Not enough to change anything. No, he said. The truth of it didn't need explaining. A faint pause followed, stretching just long enough for the weight of the moment to settle fully between them. You should know what you've chosen, she said. That made him look at her. I already do. No, she said quietly. You know what you lost, not what you stepped into. The distinction mattered. He could feel it. He crossed his arms slowly, leaning back slightly against the table, his gaze fixed on her now, not as someone he had saved, not as a stranger, but as the reason everything had changed. Then tell me, he said. The words were simple, but this time, she didn't avoid them. She stepped forward slightly, the firelight catching along the edges of her face, revealing the exhaustion she had been holding back, the strain beneath her control. I wasn't always running, she began. Her voice was steady, but there was something deeper beneath it now. I was part of something before. The man didn't interrupt, didn't push. He just listened. Not a tribe, she continued. Not in the way you think. Something more organized, more controlled. Her gaze shifted briefly, not away from him, but inward, as if she were looking back at something she hadn't fully left behind. We weren't just fighters, she said. We were used. The word landed harder than expected. How, he asked. She met his gaze again. We were sent where others didn't want to go. Told who to hunt, who to break, who to remove. The man's expression tightened slightly. By who? She shook her head once. People who don't show themselves. That didn't make it better. It made it worse. You followed those orders, he said. It wasn't a question. She didn't deny it. Yes. The words sat between them. Heavy, uncomfortable, real. The man looked away briefly, processing it, letting it settle into everything else he had already been forced to accept. And then you stopped, he said. Yes. Why? This time, she hesitated. Not because she didn't have an answer, but because it wasn't simple. Because I realized what we were doing wasn't survival, she said. It was control. Her voice lowered slightly. We weren't protecting anything. We weren't defending anyone. We were being used to make sure others stayed afraid. The silence that followed stretched longer. Because the meaning of that, the truth behind it, cut deeper than anything he had expected. So you walked away, he said. Yes. And they let you? A faint, humorless breath escaped her. No. The answer carried more weight than anything else. They don't let anyone walk away, she added. The man nodded slowly. That explains the hunters. Yes. Another pause. And you came here knowing they'd follow. This time, she didn't answer immediately. Then, yes. The honesty didn't soften the impact. It sharpened it. The man looked at her again, more carefully now, seeing not just the fighter, not just the survivor, but the past she carried with her. You brought this with you, he said. I did. The admission was clean, unhidden. And you still came. Her eyes held his. Yes. A faint silence followed. Then, why, he asked. The question came quieter this time. Not accusing, not demanding, just real. She didn't look away. Because I didn't have anywhere else left to go, she said. The words settled into the room, filling the space between them with something heavier than anger, heavier than fear. Truth. The man exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting for a moment before returning to her. And now, he asked. She didn't hesitate. Now you're part of it. The simplicity of it didn't make it easier, but it made it clear. The man nodded once, taking it in, accepting it, because there was no denying it anymore. No pretending this was something small, something temporary. This was bigger, deeper, and it wasn't going away. You should hate me for this, she said quietly. The words came unexpectedly. The man looked at her. For a long moment. He didn't answer, because the truth was complicated, because the hatred he had carried for so long didn't fit here the way it used to, because the person in front of him didn't match the thing he had always believed in. And finally, he shook his head slightly. I don't, he said. The words were quiet, but certain. The woman studied him, something shifting behind her eyes. Not relief, not surprise. Something else. Something that hadn't been there before. Because in that moment, the man didn't just accept what she was. He accepted what she had done, and what it meant. And that was something neither of them had expected. The day stretched thin, every hour sharpened by the knowledge of what was coming. Word traveled fast in a village that small. By noon, the distance between the house and the rest of the settlement felt wider than the forest itself. No one came back to argue. No one came to plead. The absence was deliberate, a quiet that meant decisions had already been made. Inside, the man moved through what remained of his life. Not quickly, not frantically, but with a strange calm that settled into his hands as he gathered what little he could carry. A pack, a few tools, water, food enough for a day or two. Each object felt heavier than it should, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented, pieces of a life he would not return to. Behind him, the woman watched. You don't have to take anything, she said. It'll slow you down. He didn't stop packing. I'm not leaving with nothing. You already are, she replied. The truth landed, but he didn't argue it. Instead, he tied the pack closed and set it near the door, his gaze drifting across the room one last time. The walls held no memories he could take with him. The fire burned, but it no longer felt like his. Then we don't stay long enough for it to matter, he said. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not disagreement, but calculation. She was already thinking ahead, always thinking ahead. They'll be waiting, she said. I know. They'll expect you to leave by the main path. I won't. A faint pause. Then, good, she said. The quiet settled again, but this time it carried something else with it, alignment. Not agreement born from comfort, but from necessity. He stepped toward the door and opened it. The village lay in a stillness that felt staged. No voices, no movement. Doors closed, windows dark. It was the kind of quiet that watched without being seen. They're here, he said. Yes. The word came softly, certain. He stepped out first. Not cautiously, not boldly, just forward. The woman followed, her posture already shifting, her awareness widening, her eyes moving across the rooftops, the alleys, the spaces where someone could be without being visible. They moved together, not side by side at first. She stayed half a step behind, her position angled, her attention covering what he could not see. They reached the edge of the open space near the well when the first voice came. You should have left when we told you. The man stopped. He didn't turn immediately. He didn't need to. He knew the voice. The same man from before. The one who had spoken for the others. He turned slowly. They were there. Spread out now. Not a crowd. A line. Waiting. You had your chance, the man at the front said. I used it, he replied. A faint ripple passed through them. Not surprise, but confirmation. This was what they had expected. Behind him, the woman shifted slightly. Stay close, she murmured. He didn't respond, but he didn't move away either. You're leaving, the man at the front said. It wasn't a question. No, the man replied. The words settled into the space. Firm, unshaken. Another pause. Then you don't leave at all. The meaning was clear. Final. The line between them closed. Not physically, but in intent. The villagers stepped forward. Not rushing, not charging, just enough. The man felt it, his body tensing, his instincts rising, his awareness catching up to what was about to happen. He had never fought them, never needed to. They had always been his people. Until now. The first movement came from the side. Fast, unexpected. He reacted late, too late to stop it cleanly, but enough to shift, to avoid the full force of the strike aimed at him. And then, she was there, between him and them. The blade in her hand moved in a controlled arc, not wild, not reckless, precise. It caught the next advance before it could reach him, turning it aside, forcing distance where there had been none. Back, she said. Not to them. To him. He didn't step back. Not fully. But he adjusted, just enough to give her space, just enough to understand what she needed. The villagers hesitated, not because they feared her, but because they hadn't expected her to protect him. Not like that. She's defending him, someone said. The words carried disbelief. She's a monster, another replied. No, the man said. The word cut through them. Clear. They looked at him, and for the first time, he didn't see familiarity in their eyes. Only distance. The line had become a wall. Another movement. Closer. More forceful. She met it again. Her blade moved faster now, sharper, forcing them back without striking to kill, holding space, controlling distance, keeping them from reaching him. The man saw it, understood it. She wasn't attacking them. She was protecting him. From them. From the people he had once trusted. And something inside him shifted again. Because now, it wasn't just him standing for her. It was her standing for him. The balance had changed. The truth had changed. Everything had. He stepped forward. Not past her, but with her. Close enough that they moved as one line instead of two. The villagers saw it. Felt it. You're choosing it over us, the man at the front said. No, he replied. The word came steady. I'm choosing not to become you. The silence that followed cut deeper than any blade. Because this time, there was no misunderstanding. No doubt. Only truth. And as the tension rose again, as the space between them tightened once more, the man realized something he hadn't fully understood until now. Protection wasn't one-sided. It never had been. And in the moment where everything else had been taken from him, the one thing that remained was the choice to stand. Together. No matter what came next. They left before the next strike could land. Not running. Not fleeing. But moving with purpose. Breaking from the standoff in a single, decisive moment that caught the villagers just off balance enough to matter. The woman shifted first, her blade forcing space, her movement cutting a path through the tension. The man followed, not perfectly, not cleanly, but close enough that he stayed within that narrow space she created. Behind them, voices rose, shouts, anger, the sound of pursuit beginning, but they didn't turn back. They couldn't, because staying would have ended everything. The village fell behind them slowly at first, then all at once as the forest closed in, the trees swallowing the open space, the familiar paths twisting into something less certain, less known. The man didn't speak. Neither did she. There was no need. Every step carried the same understanding. There was nothing left behind worth returning to. Not anymore. They moved until the sounds faded. Until the village became something distant, something behind them, something that no longer belonged to either of them. Only then did they stop. The man leaned slightly against a tree, his breath heavier now, his body catching up to the strain he hadn't allowed himself to feel before. The silence here was different, not the quiet of isolation, but the quiet of distance. Distance from everything he had been. You kept up, she said. It wasn't praise. It was observation. Barely, he replied. The corner of her expression shifted slightly, almost something like acknowledgement, but it didn't stay long. They won't stop, she said. I know. The answer came easier now. There was no point pretending otherwise. They'll follow the path first, she continued. Then they'll spread out. The man nodded slowly, pushing himself upright again. Then we don't stay near the path. No. Another pause. Then, we don't stay anywhere. The truth settled in fully. This wasn't escape. This was movement. Constant. Unending. The man looked around the forest, at the unfamiliar stretch of land that now surrounded him, at the absence of anything that felt like home. This is it, he said quietly. She glanced at him. What is? My life now. The words carried no bitterness, no regret, just fact. She studied him for a moment, as if expecting something more. Anger, doubt, hesitation. It didn't come. You lost everything, she said. Yes. Another pause. And you're not going to say it was a mistake. He shook his head. No. The answer didn't waver. That seemed to catch her more than anything else. Why? She asked. The man exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting briefly through the trees before returning to her. Because I know what it would have meant if I hadn't done it, he said. Her eyes narrowed slightly. What? He met her gaze. I would still have everything, he said. And I would know I let someone die to keep it. The words settled into the space between them. Heavy. Unavoidable. And you could live with that? She asked. He didn't answer right away. Because the truth was clear. No, he said finally. The honesty in it left no room for anything else. She looked away then, her gaze shifting outward, her posture tightening just slightly, not in tension, but in thought. You understand the cost now, she said. Yes. And you still choose it. Yes. The repetition didn't weaken it. It strengthened it. The woman stood there for a moment longer, something shifting behind her eyes. Not doubt, not confusion. Recognition. Because what he had said, what he had chosen, was not something she expected. Not from him. Not from someone who had once hated everything she represented. You're not who you were, she said. No. The word came quietly, but with certainty. The man adjusted the pack on his shoulder, his body settling into the weight of it. Not just the physical weight, but everything it carried with it. Neither are you, he added. She didn't respond, but she didn't deny it either. The silence that followed felt different. Not empty, not tense, but grounded. Because now, there was no illusion left. No belief to hide behind. No life to return to. Only what was in front of them. The forest, the path, the danger that would follow, and the choice they had both made. The man took a step forward. Not hesitating, not waiting, just moving. She followed. Not behind him, not ahead of him, but beside him. And as they disappeared deeper into the trees, leaving behind the last traces of what had once been his world, the truth settled fully into place. Compassion had cost him everything. His home, his place, his past. But it had also given him something else. Something he hadn't expected. Clarity. Because for the first time, he wasn't living by what he had been told. He was living by what he chose. And whatever came next, whatever waited for them in the shadows ahead, he would face it without the weight of who he used to be. Because that man was gone, and the one who remained had nothing left to lose. The forest did not welcome them. It simply allowed them to pass. Branches scraped softly against their clothes as they moved deeper, the path dissolving into uneven ground, roots, and shadows that shifted with every step. The man had never come this far before, not because he couldn't, but because he had never needed to. Everything he had wanted had always been behind him. Now, there was nothing behind him, only forward. The woman moved ahead slightly, her pace steady, her eyes scanning without pause. She didn't look lost. She didn't hesitate. Even here, even in unfamiliar ground, she moved like someone who had learned to survive anywhere. The man followed, not matching her exactly, but not falling behind either. They didn't speak for a long time, because there was nothing to say that would change where they were, or what they had become. Eventually, she slowed, not stopping, but enough to signal something had shifted. What is it? He asked quietly. She didn't turn. Tracks, she said. He stepped closer, trying to see what she saw, but the ground looked the same to him. Dirt, leaves, broken twigs. I don't see anything. You don't need to, she replied. I do. A faint pause. They're faster than I expected. The words tightened the air immediately. The man exhaled slowly. They followed us already. Yes. No hesitation. No doubt. They won't stop, she added. I know. The repetition came easier now. More certain. He adjusted his grip on the strap of his pack, his body already preparing to move again, to keep going, to not give them the time to catch up. But this time, he didn't step forward. Instead, he stood still, thinking. The woman noticed. You should keep moving, she said. He didn't. They'll catch us anyway, he replied. The words were calm. Too calm. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she turned to face him. That's not a reason to stop. No, he said. It's a reason to decide. A faint silence followed. What are you saying? She asked. He met her gaze. I'm saying running isn't enough. The truth settled between them. She didn't argue it. Because she knew. Running bought time. Nothing more. They're better at this than we are, he continued. They've been doing it longer. They know how to track. How to wait. How to close distance. And you don't, she said. No. Another pause. But I can learn one thing, he added. Her expression didn't change. What? He glanced back the way they had come. They expect us to run. Yes. Then we stop. The idea landed hard. Immediate. Dangerous. Her gaze sharpened. That gets you killed. Running gets us caught, he replied. Another silence. Longer this time. Because this wasn't instinct. This was choice. They'll be ready for a fight, she said. He nodded. I know. You're not. No. The honesty didn't weaken his position. It made it clearer. She studied him for a moment, searching for hesitation, for doubt, for anything that would suggest he didn't understand what he was proposing. She didn't find it. Why? She asked. The question came quieter this time. Not challenging. Understanding. He took a slow breath. Because I'm tired of reacting, he said. Tired of letting everything else decide what happens next. The words carried weight. More than he expected. I spent my whole life believing things I was told, he continued. Letting fear decide what was right. What was wrong? His gaze met hers again. I'm not doing that anymore. The silence that followed felt different. Not tense. Not uncertain. Resolved. The woman didn't respond immediately. Then, she nodded. Once. Small. But real. Then we don't run, she said. The words settled into place. Final. The man exhaled slowly, something inside him shifting. Not into confidence. Not into certainty. But into something steadier. Choice. He set his pack down. The movement was simple. But it meant everything. The woman adjusted her stance slightly, her awareness sharpening again, her focus shifting from movement to position, from escape to engagement. They'll come from behind first, she said. Then we face behind, he replied. Another pause. Then, they'll try to split us. They won't, he said. Her eyes flicked to him. And how do you know that? He met her gaze. Because I won't let them. The words weren't bold. They weren't loud. But they held. The forest grew quieter around them, the kind of quiet that comes just before something breaks it. They waited. Not for long. Because soon, the sound came. Footsteps. Measured. Closing in. The woman didn't draw her blade yet. The man didn't move. They stood. Side by side. Not as someone protecting. Not as someone being protected. But as two people who had made the same choice. To stop running. To face what followed. And as the shadows shifted between the trees. As the hunters finally stepped into view. The man realized something with absolute clarity. This was the moment that defined him. Not what he had been. Not what he had lost. But what he chose now. And this time, there was no hesitation. No doubt. No turning back. Only forward. Together. The forest held its breath. The moment stretched thin as the figures emerged from between the trees. Quiet. Deliberate. Inevitable. The hunters didn't rush. They didn't need to. They had tracked them this far without effort. And now they stood just within sight, watching with the same cold patience that had followed them since the beginning. The man didn't move. Neither did she. They stood side by side, not shifting, not preparing in the frantic way he might have before. The fear was still there. He could feel it, sharp and alive, but it no longer controlled him. It sat beneath something else now. Choice. The hunters stepped closer. One at the front, two behind, spread just enough to control the space, to close any gap that might allow escape. You stopped running, the one in front said. His voice was calm, observing. The man met his gaze. Yes. A faint pause. That's new. Everything is. The hunter studied him for a moment, his attention shifting briefly to the woman, then back again. You've changed, he said. The man didn't answer. Because he had. And he didn't need to explain it. The woman shifted slightly beside him, not stepping forward, not drawing her blade yet, but ready. Always ready. The man could feel it now, the way she read the space, the way she measured distance, timing, movement. This time, he wasn't trying to understand it. He trusted it. You don't belong here, the hunter continued. The words were directed at him now, not her. The man let out a slow breath. I don't belong where I came from either. The truth landed without force. But it stayed. The hunter tilted his head slightly, as if considering that. Then you've made yourself nothing. The man shook his head. No, he said. The word came steady. I made myself something else. A faint silence followed. Then, step away, the hunter said. The command was simple, direct. Leave this, and you walk away. The offer hung there. Real. Tempting. Easy. For a moment. The man felt it. The weight of everything he had lost. The simplicity of taking it back. All he had to do was step away. He glanced at her. She didn't look at him. Didn't ask. Didn't expect. She simply stood, ready to face whatever came next. Alone. If she had to. That was enough. The man looked back at the hunter. No, he said. The words settled into the forest. Final. The hunter's expression didn't change, but something behind it shifted. Then this ends here, he said. The moment broke. The hunters moved. Fast. Precise. The man reacted. Not perfectly. Not with skill. But with awareness. He moved with her this time. Not behind. Not after. With. The woman's blade came free in a single motion, her movement cutting into the space between them and the attackers, forcing the first strike aside before it could land. The man followed, not with a weapon, not with the same control, but with intent. He closed distance where he needed to, disrupted movement where he could, gave her the openings she needed to turn defense into control. The fight wasn't clean. It wasn't balanced. But it was different. Because this time, she wasn't alone. And neither was he. The hunters adjusted quickly, their movements tightening, their approach sharper. They hadn't expected resistance from him. They hadn't expected him to matter. That was their mistake. Another strike. She turned it. Another. He shifted just enough to break its angle. Together, they held. Not perfectly. Not easily. But enough. The rhythm changed. The hunters slowed. Not from weakness. From recalculation. And in that hesitation, she moved. Faster. Sharper. Decisive. The space broke open. The line shattered. And for the first time, the hunters stepped back. Not retreating, but acknowledging. This wasn't what they had expected. The moment held. Then, slowly, they pulled away. Not defeated, but unwilling to continue on terms they no longer controlled. This isn't over, the one in front said. The man nodded. I know. The hunters faded back into the trees, their presence dissolving into the forest as quietly as it had appeared. The silence returned. But it was different now. Not heavy, not uncertain, clear. The woman lowered her blade slowly, her breathing controlled, her posture easing just enough to signal the end of the moment. The man stood beside her, his chest rising and falling steadily, his body still tense, but grounded. You could have left, she said. He nodded. Yes. And you didn't. No. A faint pause. Then, why? The question came softer this time. Not because she didn't understand, but because she wanted to hear it. The man looked out into the trees, where the hunters had disappeared, then back at her. Because I finally chose something for myself, he said. The words felt different. Lighter. True. Another silence followed. Then, you lost everything, she said. He shook his head slightly. No, he replied. The answer came without hesitation. I lost what I thought I was. He met her gaze. And I found something better. The words settled between them. Not loud. Not dramatic. But real. Because the truth was simple now. He had started as someone defined by hatred. By fear. By certainty that had never been questioned. But that man was gone. And in his place was someone who had chosen compassion. Who had chosen to stand. Who had chosen to change. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. The woman studied him for a moment. Something steady forming behind her eyes. Not surprise, not doubt. Respect. Then she nodded once. Small, but enough. The man turned slightly, looking ahead into the forest. Not at where they had been, but at where they would go next. The path wasn't clear. The future wasn't certain. But for the first time, that didn't matter. Because he knew who he was now. And that was something no one could take from him. Not even the cost of everything he had lost.